yes, I was talking about my time in Switzerland, where I was expanding my practice. And I also worked in education during that time, and that gave me a real curiosity to kind of see how that kind of connection that you get with people from working in education could be linked to an art practice. And that led me to discovering socially engaged art. And I really wanted to learn more about it. And so in 2017, I decided to study socially engaged art with the Master Trans program in Geneva. And then in 2020, I moved back to Ireland. Moving country during a pandemic can be a challenge, but I think we are incredibly lucky here in Ireland to have an arts and culture sector that found so many ways to keep creating, despite kind of the various restrictions that we've gone through in the last 2 years. I was fortunate enough, as Catherine mentioned, to get involved in some fantastic projects that are going on here in Wexford, including the Living Arts Project, which is run by the Wexford Arts Centre and Wexford County Council, where you get contemporary artists into primary schools all around the country to work with students. I also got an artist bursary from Wexford County Council and Creative Ireland, where I created Wexford Stories, which is an online community platform where people can share stories about the people and places that are kind of special to them in Wexford. And then I use that to create a digital map of the region that reflects the memories and the people who live there rather than the touristic locations. A lot of my projects explore public space, community, and a sense of belonging, although the groups I work with and the materials I use to achieve this can vary. You might be asking now, what is socially engaged art? There we go. It covers a wide range of activities, and you'll also sometimes hear the terms community or collaborative art thrown in there as well. The Tate has this definition of socially engaged practice. Socially engaged practice describes art that is collaborative, often participatory, and involves people as the medium or material of the work. What that might mean, I'll try by giving you a little explanation and an example. What it really means is that the moment of collaboration and exchange, when the public is involved in the making of an artwork, is just as important as the finished product. If you are, for example, a painter and you create your paintings in the studio, the public interacts with your work at the moment when you exhibit them in the gallery. However, if you are working in socially engaged practice or collaborative practice, the public is involved in the creation of the artwork as well. And that exchange you have with the public and that collaboration as you build the artwork together is just as important as the final piece that you have at the end of your experience. There are lots of different examples of what that could be, from working with a school group to put together an exhibition, or from working with a group of older people to collect their stories, or from working with a group in a housing estate to put together a book of recipes. There's endless variety and examples of how people engage in a collaborative manner with arts practice. Moving on to the publication. Often when you work as an artist in a collaborative setting, you're the only artist in the room. And talking to other artists and creatives about your practice, about the choices you've made or the questions you have, about where your next move might be with the piece or what you might be considering of doing with it next, is really invaluable in terms of your artistic and creative development. And I think we can all say over the last 2 years, opportunities to meet with other artists or educators, curators have been thin on the ground. And that's something I wanted to address for my own practice, and something that I also thought could be useful for other people. So last year I applied for an Agility Award in order to interview 8 artists, educators and curators involved with socially engaged art, and put that together into an e-publication. A quick side note on the Agility Award: it's an award given by the Arts Council of Ireland that is focused on artist development. It's a very flexible award that covers a wide range of activities, and it's really nice to see that focus here in Ireland on giving artists the time and the space to reflect on what might help them best in their career, rather than kind of putting the focus solely on producing work constantly. So if you are considering applying for the Agility Award, I would definitely recommend it. Anyway, back to the publication. It's a brief walkthrough of socially engaged art in Ireland. There are lots of interesting projects and artworks mentioned in it that you can delve into afterwards if you're interested. There are 4 main sections, and they cover different aspects of the practice. The publication is made up of the conversations I had with these 8 contributors. So it's quite conversational in tone, and it's really a very accessible way to learn more about this field if that's something that interests you. So yeah, without further ado, I suppose I'll be moving on to our guests today. I'll give a brief introduction to Clodagh and then chat to her. And then when I chat to William, I'll give an introduction to his work as well, if that's okay with everyone. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat box. So if you do have any questions that come up for you during our conversations, pop them in there and we'll make sure to get to them at the end of the event. Okay, is that all right with everyone? Great. Then I'll briefly introduce Clodagh, who is an artist and educator based in Dublin. She has a BA in Fine Art from NCAD, an MA in Fine Art from Chelsea College of Art and Design in London, and a PhD from GradCam DIT. Her collaborative projects expose how meaning is formed through our connection with each other and the natural world. And she's currently working on a residency at Emoe, where she's developing Seed Studio, which is a proposal for an ecological space at Emoe's green site. Hi, Clodagh, how are you?
I'll unmute. Thanks, Rachel. Great to be here. And I'm just looking at your In Conversation booklet, and the headings that you've put everything in is really concise and really reader friendly. So like, big congratulations for putting all of that information together. So it's a great resource. And it's great to be here. You know, Rachel was asking me to get some images together, and what I kind of suggested was maybe to talk through 2 projects. So I'm conscious that you're probably tight on time, Rachel. So tell me just to stop if it's going on too much, because there are 2 projects I want to speak about, and there's quite a lot to them. And I mean, even halfway through, if we need to stop, let me know, because there's nothing worse than. So rest assured, I mean, you know. So I'll share my screen, and it's just kind of, I just thought if I kind of talked about it, it might be a little bit clearer. So let's share my screen and see how we get on. And just to say thanks, Rachel, for inviting me to be here. And it's great to be here with William as well, and to see everybody here, and Catherine from the Wexford Arts Centre, and Lisa, thank you. Okay, let's make this. Okay. Can everybody hear me and not Scooby-Doo in the background? Yeah, okay.
We can hear you fine.
Okay, so I've titled this talk Approaching an Understanding of Place. And I'll start with a first line from a poem written by Sunisa Konchik, who's a collaborator on this project. And he says, "One bench, all my world." So this is a poem that resulted from this project. And for Konchik, a former citizen of Yugoslavia, the small bench is more than a site. It is the place he goes to find meaning. As he looks across to the other side of the river, he asks in his poem, different country, same people, what kind of life is there? How do the lilacs smell there? So my talk today reflects on two socially engaged projects: the plurality of existence in the infinite expanse of space and time, which is a very long-winded title, but I felt it needed a long title. It's actually kind of taken from Rancière's reflections on Auguste Blanqui, but for now I'll refer to it as the plurality of existence, and then Crocosmia X. So I wanted to speak about place in relation to these projects and consider how we might approach an understanding of place, not as a site or a geographically fixed point, but as a space of meaning. This understanding of place as a space of meaning is proposed by the cultural geographer Yi-Fu Chun. I find Chun's proposed proposition useful when reflecting on these works and the concerns and motivations of my own practice, because he registers thought and also emotion in the same experiential continuum. So this idea of thinking and feeling and being part and parcel. The plurality of existence is a collaborative project that I initiated with a group of individuals seeking asylum in Ireland, many of them living within the system of direct provision and in partnership with Sporasi. Sporasi is Ireland's only non-government organisation for survivors of torture who are migrants and asylum seekers. The artworks that unfolded from this project, all with the same title, were not determined from the outset, but evolved out of a weekly gardening group that I established in the grounds of Sporasi. Now, I'm not a professional gardener, and that was key. With no teacher leading the group, we relied on each other to develop and maintain the garden. Our collective efforts transformed the place. We planted apple trees, raspberry bush along the side walls, rhubarb, potatoes, and onions at the back of the building, fragrant jasmine, lavender, and herbs to the entrance of the centre. And over time, I believe we established a space of meaning for us, a shared space where tacit knowledge could flourish. According to the British-Hungarian polymath Michael Polanyi, tacit knowledge is a series of skills, ideas, and experience that is not codified or easily expressed. As Polanyi states, we can know more than we can tell. Developing on this, Polanyi observes that many individuals are unaware of the knowledge they possess. And this is the case for many individuals who have to endure the system of direct provision, whose agency and sense of self-worth have been eroded through social exclusion and isolation. For Polanyi, tacit knowledge is often only revealed in practice and through close involvement and cooperation. Our coming together each week gave individuals a deeper awareness of the value of their knowledge and their contribution to the project, which began to take root. We formalized our collaboration with the name Crocosmia. Crocosmia is an abbreviation of Crocosmia X Crocosma Flora. And I know William has used this plant as well because it's seen all over the west of Ireland and Wexford as well, and probably in people's gardens who have maybe stolen it from their hedgerow in County Clare or County Kerry or Cork. So this is more commonly known as Montbretia or back to school flowers because it blooms late summer, or the Failstem Darrig. And it's found all over hedgerows in Ireland, but it's in fact a hybrid of two African species, Crocosmia ora and Crocosmia potsi. So we found the corm of this plant. This is the exact corm we found while we were gardening in Sporasi. And, you know, I was saying that this was a native flower, and then we realized that it was, you know, it's actually a hybrid from Africa. So we co-opted the name for the collaborators who had themselves been uprooted, forced to leave their homeland and create a new life in a foreign land. These vibrant flowers blooming in late summer in the Irish landscape offered a symbol of hope while demonstrating how diversity enhances place. The Crocosmia collaborators are Marie-Claire Mundi-Nejong from the Cameroon, Sinisa Konchik from former Yugoslavia, Jean-Marie Rakunda Philemon from Rwanda, Annette Mafale from Uganda, Saida Umar from Pakistan, and Peter Rakundo from Rwanda. And my motivation for initiating the project was to engage with people who have to endure a discriminatory system of direct provision. I wanted to create a space of representation, a space to represent hidden narratives from the unique perspective of those who are not represented in or adequately by the legislative, cultural, and political frameworks within our society. I did not anticipate or play the place of the poem in this project. It was Jean-Marie's poem, and this is Jean-Marie there with Peter, his poem War Child, that he read to the group one afternoon, which instigated a big point of departure, inspiring the group to embark on their own exploration of poetry and to start beginning writing, which in turn resulted in a much more ambitious, far-reaching kind of series of artworks. A series of site-specific audio works. So we transmitted them over bridges. So we chose these liminal sites. Bridges are places that we traverse across and we tend not to linger. So the voices of Marie-Claire, Jean-Marie, Annette, Peter, Saida, and Sunisa all reading their poems in the native language and in the English translation was transmitted over these rivers. So this is Marie-Claire in visual Carlo. So the works were also presented in an exhibition that was curated by Emma Lucy O'Brien in visual Carlo. So it was really important to get these works not only into the public realm, kind of in the cities, but also into the institutional space of the museum and the art centre. And this was this way of kind of crossing these thresholds, but not crossing a threshold as an audience, but as a contributor. We then published the poems in an anthology, and we launched this. Senator Alice Mary Higgins launched this in Pearse Street Library. And then we had kind of different activities, I suppose, unfolded out of this that we really didn't anticipate. So Sunisa and Marie-Claire were interviewed on the Arena show and on an In Culture show, and we kind of participated in conferences, the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, another one down in Cork, and one in Trinity as well. So it was about kind of bringing these voices into the public realm. In the Handbook of Aesthetics, philosopher Alan Badiou locates art as the site or place where truths emerge. In his handbook, he reflects on the poems of the Arabian poet Labid Ben Rabai and French poet Mallarmé to speak of the poem as a special regime of thought, an open process that initiates a space for the emergence of truth. Although we did not set a theme, the poems that each created all speak about place, both explicitly, particularly in the final lines of Marie-Claire's Funeral Cameroon, where she sings, home again, when shall I see my home again? And implicitly through the language and operation in the poem. In Sinisha's poem, Vukovar, Croatia, he uses the word komshia. Let me show you here. Oh, so there it is in the top corner. I've put a little red circle around it. During the editing process, this word was replaced by the proofreader with the word susyed. So we see that on the left-hand side. What I later found out from Sunisa was that komshia is of Turkish Muslim origin, whereas susyed is a Slavic Christian word. That these different words were interchangeable highlight the closeness and rich diversity of culture in former Yugoslavia that was, in Sunisa's own words, a country torn apart. What is even more pertinent is that these two words, komshia and susyed, when translated into English, mean neighbor. The publication of the poems and its distribution extended the project in scale and reach, disclosing these narratives and realities of these writers to a wider audience. To ensure that the poem remains open for the reader's imagination, no images accompany them. Instead, the designer John Sherwin and I use cartography to reference place in the design of the book. Contours of the countries where the poems are set float on empty pages throughout the book. Isolated from their place on the map, these linear forms symbolize the experience of the asylum seeker disconnected from their homeland. And poetry offers a bridge that connects back to this homeland and extends out to other. This dual notion of bridging back and extending out are suggested by an area that appears on the cover and throughout the book, a representation of the 7 countries that coalesce and come together. So as contours slip so that borders superimpose on one another, rendering them obsolete. This represented space, and indeed the project as a whole, advances an alternative conception of community that is centered on the relations that are formed across categories of nation, race, and culture. So through their contribution, the unique voices of Crocosmia offered a new reading of community that is not determined by sameness, but one that admits and embraces the plurality of existence. So that's the first project, which led on to Crocosmia X, but I just want to flag with Rachel before I go on. I'm conscious of your time, so I don't know how we're doing for time.
You've got about 5 minutes left, if that's okay.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just let you know about the next project. So the plurality of existence was from 2015 to 2017, and it was just that we got such kind of positive feedback when we spoke about the name Crocosmia. It seemed to resonate with people who were very kind of aware of the flower, but many didn't know that it was actually a hybrid of an African flower. So we kind of felt that we needed to kind of expand on this and take advantage of metaphor. And what was ironic as well was Professor Bridget Anderson, who contributed an essay to this publication, spoke about how we needed positive metaphors, how often the asylum seeker is described in a very negative way and like really negative metaphors. And she said we need a positive metaphor. And we thought to ourselves, well, we actually have that. We have that with the Crocosmia. So Crocosmia X is the next chapter in dialogue around diversity in Ireland, and use the poetic device of metaphor to encourage the public to re-examine received notions of native and foreign. Crocosmia X Crocosmiflora not only offered a symbol of hope, but also a gentle reminder of the challenges endured by those displaced by political, social, environmental issues. So for this project, my collaborators on the first project, they were far too busy to be working with me on this project because they were getting on with their own lives. Marie-Claire has just recently finished her degree in social and community work, so I'll be attending her graduation in a couple of weeks. And they all have their status, so they really didn't have time to kind of work on this project. So I was very fortunate to work with Hala Farhan Dawood of Iraq, Ragad Farhan Dawood of Iraq, Papi Kahyoa Kasonga from the Congo, Mohammed and Fatima from Iran, and Romeo Kimbambe Katenge from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So we aim to cultivate Crocosmia X as a positive affirmative metaphor for diversity in Ireland through participation and exchange. For this project, we extended out of our place of work beyond the Garden of Sparassi and brought our creative actions out into the wider community. In seeking to share a metaphor, by including others in the realization of artworks, this project brought a diverse range of people together. So instead of purchasing the plants, we put a call out in the Irish Times and we exchanged the plants for our anthology of poems. So we got species from, fancy formal gardens and from regular suburban gardens and from inner city spaces. So it was a really it was a very slow process, but it was kind of hugely important to the project about connecting with people. So coming together with others created momentary spaces that allowed us to share our metaphor and its meaning. We extended the project by connecting with local schools, D7 Educate Together Primary School and Stanhope Street and the Brunner Secondary School. And so we developed a series of workshops centered on the metaphor Crocosmia. And we situated these outside of the formal space of the classroom. So we would kind of read and discuss the poems, and we would also be gardening. And in a way, it kind of opened up our conversation, and they seemed to resonate on a much deeper level. The invitation to uproot our activities from the Garden of Sparassi to the nursery and the RHK Emma from The curator, Janice Hock, and the head gardener, Mary Conlon, linked the participants to the museum. Although they had never visited the museum, Mary and her team, it really made a huge impact because we were welcomed and we were encouraged to use the space every Friday. The head gardener, Mary in Emma, is the most generous, open woman, and she just let us have that place as our own. And that was a really significant moment for us to have that place. And in a sense, it became our place, and that was hugely important. So because the project spoke about ideas, so our intention was to plant these wildflowers to surround the tiered concrete steps in TU Dublin, because this project was commissioned by the Lives We Live, a Grange Gorman Development Agency project, but also supported by Emma. So we chose the edge of the front lawn where there's an old metal bench. And it kind of transformed these once neglected sites into intimate spaces for people to gather and meet. That's a small curtain there. So the permanent sign beside each artwork in Emma and TUD Grange Gorman acts as a reminder of the metaphor Crocosmia X. So a metaphor for diversity that appears every summer with the blooming of these vibrant flowers by the bench in the front lawn of Emma and in the TUD campus. So the names of the main participants are listed beside each of the work. So acknowledging their contribution to the project bears witness to these individuals' capacity to create meaning through the creation of artworks in an unfamiliar foreign place. Their willingness to share their collective creative activities to the wider community extended this space of inclusion and belonging to others. Like Conscious Bench, Crocosmia X reminds us that we can approach an understanding of place, not just as a fixed site where the artwork exists, but as a dynamic experiential space where concepts of inclusion and belonging can be cultivated and maybe felt. So that's a picture of Marie Claire at the launch.
That sounds fascinating, Clodagh. Thank you so much for explaining those projects to us. It was really interesting to see how they developed over time. And yeah, I look forward to hearing a bit more about them in the question and answer section.
And just to say, Rachel, Marie Claire, Sanisa and Jean-Marie and I will be participating in the study morning in the Hugh Lane Gallery tomorrow as part of the Hiwaka exhibition. So if anyone would like to hear Marie Claire's poems or Sanisa's or Jean-Marie's, they'll be doing readings. I think it's on Zoom, it's on Eventbrite. So if you go to the Hugh Lane website, you can see.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'll make sure to check that out. Unreal. All right.
Sharing.
And then we'll move on to William now. Hi, William. How are you?
Hi. Hi, Rachel.
I'll give you a brief introduction and then maybe ask you about your practice a bit. Does that sound okay?
Absolutely.
Excellent. So for anyone who doesn't know, William is an interdisciplinary artist based between Ireland and the UK, and he explores relationships between people and the environments they inhabit. He has a BA in Performance Design and Practice from Central St. Martin's and an MA in Fine Art from the City and Guilds School of Art in London. And he's joining us today down from the Uillinn West Cork Art Centre, if I'm not wrong. Excellent. So yeah, I suppose if you could maybe give a brief introduction to your work for anyone who isn't familiar with it.
Absolutely. Are you happy with me sharing screen?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm just going to give you a kind of more of an overview of the different types of projects that I've been working on over the last few years. But yeah, firstly, I just wanted to thank you again for inviting me to be part of this event, but also part of the publication. It's an amazing achievement to bring so many different practitioners together and make it accessible for a wider audience. It's a brilliant project.
Thank you.
Yeah, and fascinating also to hear about your work, Clodagh. There's a lot of crossovers I can kind of see. So, so hold on a second. I'm just gonna share my screen. So, as Rachel said, my practice is um, interdisciplinary. It's rooted in collaboration, and um, increasingly it's situated in the outdoor environment. Um, so the processes, the collaborations, the thinking is exploring particular spaces and landscapes by experiencing them directly with others. Um, in 2014, I set up or I co-founded a collective called Dig Collective, and this is a project we did in 2018 in the Alps. It's a second iteration of a project where we dig this hole over a period of time, and essentially opening up a space in the ground for other activities to happen, and I suppose responding to the stories and the context that it's being dug in. So who lives there? What are the stories of how people relate to that environment? So in the context of the Alps, which was initially, this was a project that started in London, in a place where there was massive regeneration and people being forced to leave. In the Alps, we chose a site which was based in a very, very small rural community where the older generation were having to, people who were too old to really live on their own, were forced to leave their village to go the main city, to go to a care home. So the site we chose in this village was, this is a part of a land art biennale, this commission. The site we chose was this space that was going to host a hospice. So they were going to build a hospice in the community that would provide for the older community. So the space became, we opened it up as a community space. We had an exhibition. We had various different interventions that happened, and it was open for 3 months. So there was a ladder that went down, and you could just spend time in it. There was talks, there was musical performances, and so on. So I'd say that this type of engagement with the environment and with people has kind of led me on to work that since I've actually situated myself more in West Cork and in a rural environment in Ireland, has kind of defined my interest in working very specifically in an outdoor environment. So Land Walks is a project that an AIC, Artists in the Community, funded project. So it's Arts Council funds organised by Create Ireland, who are an incredible resource for collaborative arts. And I'll just play you a quick clip for this. It's essentially I like Clodagh, engage with different communities, and one of them was residents in direct provision down here in West Cork. And I was interested in, I'd been doing a process of walking and recording conversations with people living in the area, but I wanted to meet people who were completely new to Ireland, that come from a completely different context. And the idea was, it was collaborative in the sense that I was engaging these individuals. Community is quite a loose term because essentially they're different individuals who've come from very different situations and found themselves in Ireland in this one building. But I put a call out. I went there and visited people and asked them if they'd like to participate. So it was a simple act of walking but recording the conversation as we walked. And part of that process was about getting we're inviting individuals to record and to learn how to actually go through that process of capturing and editing these recordings. So we made a series of 8 recordings together into a sound score. And this website is is a kind of the collection. It's a mapping of those walks into specific locations around. So you're invited really to walk in our footsteps. The walks vary from 10 minutes to an hour, depending on how long our walk are.
My name is Mariam Abba. I'm from Sierra Leone. My favorite plant is cassava.
There is something in my village like that thing, like this long thing. We plant it and we call it tagboyo. We beat it after cutting it. When it dries like this, that means it's okay. When they cut it, they will beat it. They will clean it. It look like rice. And they will cook it. They call it tagboyo. This one. It look exactly like that when they plant it in our farms. I don't know if that's just a grass.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to see also.
Yes.
It's a reed. We call it reed.
Reed.
Yeah. And it always grows by the water. Sort of rushes or reeds. There's kind of two types, but this could have been used.
We have reed, which is way thicker than this.
In Africa?
Oh, definitely.
Reeds, yeah. I mean, reeds.
I'll just give you an insight. You can check it out. There's a website, Landwalks, Land Talks, Landmarks, which I can share in the link later to listen more. And as you can hear, it was, I suppose, by being in the environment together and not in a kind of confrontational or a situation where we were facing each other. We were walking parallel. We were listening together, and we were responding to the environment. And the stories that we talked about connected to the plants that grew in the area, the parallels of the plants that grew in their native countries. And I suppose, similar to Clodagh's exploration of the Crocosmia, we were looking at plants that maybe were from other countries, so migrant plants, like the fuchsia flower from Peru or the Crocosmia from Africa. So plants that sort of have naturalized or have become part of the landscape and they exist there now, become a kind of starting point for a conversation about belonging and about relating to a new landscape that is very foreign to some people, but not to others. So during these walks, I would invite other people to come into those conversations, local farmers, teachers, different people who have knowledge about the landscape, about the stories that existed there, and sharing those. So they became spaces, much like the whole became a space for sort of open-ended conversations. It was about creating a kind of, I suppose, an imagined and a real space in the landscape for opening up discussion and experiences. The work culminated in an exhibition at Illin, West Cork Art Centre, with some of these plants and with the voices of the participants. So it was a sort of another iteration and a bringing together of those stories and voices in new ways. There were other strands to this, but I won't go into it now. I suppose what I wanted to just quickly move on to, I'm skipping past this project, which is more of a personal engagement during lockdown, looking at kind of the I suppose the borders or boundaries or separations between the human and the natural environment. So placing my body often in kind of historical spaces or linking them with the plants that grow in the area. But just coming back to this sort of collective activity and making in the land, a project that is in development at the moment is a research project called the Land Art Mehel. And the Mehel, as some of you I'm sure will know, is essentially a kind of an idea of a notion of kind of mutual aid, of collective coming together for a shared purpose. So obviously farmers in rural settings would be coming together to, share the labor of cutting crops or tilling the land. But I was interested in shifting that more, sort of building on what happened with Landwalks, actually talking about belonging and relationships, complex relationships with the environment, with farmers, with migrants. So creating spaces again to kind of have a tacit embodied experience of the environment alongside other people from diverse backgrounds, and one of the culminations of that is an installation that's now on at Ullin, which is an immersive sound installation, which was responding to a quarry site along the coast in West Cork. So it's a collaboration with Tomasz Madajczyk, Polish artist living down here in West Cork. So that's all for now. Thank you everyone for listening, and I'd love to hear if anyone has any questions. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, William. Those sound like, excuse me. Yeah, those sound like fascinating projects as well. I suppose what we'll do now is I certainly have a couple of questions for yourself and Clodagh, myself, and if anyone watching has a question, they can pop it in the chat box, and we'll be able to get to that as well. And yeah, that's how we'll unfold for this part of the event. Does that sound okay? Excellent. Well, I suppose one thing I find quite fascinating, it's a question for both Clodagh and William, so I'll ask you guys to kind of respond in turn, is that your projects seem to evolve over quite a lot, like they can evolve over a long period of time, and sometimes they have different iterations or different moments where you're working with a certain group, or maybe you're working inside or outside in a different area. And I suppose I'm curious to know a little bit more about how you envision that from the start. Like if you start with that idea kind of and can see where it'll go already, or if it's starting with a small idea and watching it develop over time. What do you think, William? Do you want to start?
No. I would say it varies. Sometimes I might have a clear idea, other times not. But I think with any collaborative work, whether with non-artists or not, you're often listening and responding to. You may come with a kind of initial idea of what you're wanting to explore, but actually until you're on the ground, in whatever context you're working in or with whatever people, you don't know how that's going to take shape. Like one example was I had ideas during land walks. I had ideas about how we might lead, how the discussion might go, and I sort of introduced some ideas, and the participants were like, they didn't understand what I was trying to do. But actually, letting the process unfold revealed like this conversation, which I didn't manage for us to listen into, but this when we're talking about these reeds and Kenya fruits from South Africa, so there's a ceremony when someone's getting married, and it's for women to prove they are virgins. They carry a giant reed around the village, and if it breaks, they aren't a virgin. So it's a shaming in the community. But this incredible story kind of just emerged from letting them respond to talking about these particular plants that we're seeing. So sometimes it can be a challenge, because as an artist, you're coming maybe with kind of quite strong ideas, and you're bringing it to people who maybe haven't been on that journey with you. So you have to, listening is fundamental in that, and allowing that process to evolve while still holding it within the constraints of the project.
Thanks. I think you're dead right. It's not always easy to walk in and kind of not know exactly how things will end. But I think it is a really interesting part of the practice. And it leads to a lot more surprises in the work. What do you think, Clodagh?
Yeah, I kind of try and I didn't mention that like a lot. There was a lot of people involved in the plurality of existence, a lot of funders, the Arts Council of Ireland, and then I had to seek funding and support from, then because it was in 4 different cities, the National Sculpture Factory, Cork Midsummer Festival, Cork City Council, Galway Arts Centre, Galway City Council. So you're dealing with a lot of people. And I think with my projects, I try and give that space so that there is that time for other voices. So I'm working on a project out in a school at the moment, and we're trying to build a kind of multi-purpose learning space. So we're creating an oversized greenhouse, and the plan is that it's for the school's community, but our workshops are getting the children to come up with the design, and it's kind of really interesting. I'm working with a horticulturist, and everything we had anticipated is completely different, and it's so much better. So I suppose to get that, we factored in these workshops that would give us that kind of space to allow that kind of, maybe so that we could respond to that rather than coming in with a design that we came up with. So it's very tricky because with a lot of these projects, because they do take time, and they, you have to put work out into the public. It is hard to kind of get funding for that, and usually funders want to know what they're getting. So I remember doing a project with Dublin City Council, and instead of telling them what the outcome was, I had a plan. There were activities going on, so we knew that something would happen. So I suppose it's kind of creating a structure that has enough latitude, that allows for things to happen. So I suppose it's about trying to persuade funders that, that it is worthwhile, even though you might not necessarily know what will be the outcome.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really nice way of explaining it. Thank you. We have a question from Carla Sanchez for Clodagh and William. How do you build trust with the people you're collaborating with? When you first meet them, what strategies or processes do you find works best for you to create an open and safe environment from which to start your work? So maybe William, would you like to answer first, and I'll come back to Clodagh?
Well, I would say time again is massive. You can't rush relationships. There's no way of, so building in, as Clodagh says, building in structures so that you have that space in time, whatever in a way, it doesn't matter initially what you're doing, because it's about the engagement, how people see that you're working, how you're relating to others, whether you're actually listening to them, and whether they feel like they can contribute or be part of what the activities that you're doing. Another thing is a very sort of simple thing, but food often, just like a simple thing like eating together or having tea together, is a lovely way of just finding a common space. Because often, and I think that's something that I found with land walks, when you take the focus away from that one-to-one interaction and like gardening or walking or preparing tea or food, it dispels the anxiety, the social anxiety, and the uncertainties that come with those sort of situations. Because it is quite strange, like someone coming in and presenting this maybe abstract idea to people. Like it has to be a slow burn, and people have to feel like they have a part in what you're doing with them.
Thanks. I think that's very true.
Yeah.
You can't say no to food.
You know, food is important, and particularly for people living in direct provision, where if they were working a whole day, you'd realize actually they wouldn't get their lunch. So it's even on a practical level, but that was really important in Emma. We were, you know, Janice, the curators, would join us for lunch, and you know, anytime we would go on any launches, we'd, you know, that would be kind of one of the things that I would say it's important, and often people would say, oh yeah, of course, let's do that, that's a great idea. So everybody likes sitting down for a bit of lunch, and you know, isn't that what they say, the best conversations after these kind of formal talks are, you know, afterwards, it's not in the kind of situation. I like it was kind of interesting. I started doing some yoga nidra with some of my group, because initially I was thinking of using this kind of just getting words before we even considered writing the poem. So it was kind of, I couldn't believe I think Mary Claire thought I was mad, and you know, we became great buddies. But it was that thing of, just as William's saying, time being there. I mean, with the gardening, it was just me being there in my gardening gear, and you know, getting to know, you know, some of the people that were just even having a cigarette. And the kind of interesting thing was that with the gardeners, when I said, look, I'm thinking of doing some kind of project with voices, and they said, no, we would just want to garden. So a lot of the gardeners, I ended up kind of doing 2 projects. So I in Sparassi twice a week, because we continued the gardening, but then some wanted to do the gardening and some wanted to do both. But time, I think, and food, I'd agree.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant that you managed to have 2 projects running at once by accident. I think that's it's very true, though. Sometimes just giving that time and that presence, getting to know people, taking into consideration their environment and their needs as well is huge. Mary Conroy,
a sick boy at home today. And Scooby-Doo is finished.
Oh, bless. I'm sure this is less entertaining than Scooby-Doo. Mary Conroy has a question for you both as well. She was wondering how or if you disseminate this kind of work in a gallery setting, or if you don't work with traditional exhibition spaces, how do you disseminate the work? Particularly if it's process-based or relational, how do you show that to an audience? Who'd like to go first this time?
William, you go first, because I want to hear. I remember seeing the images from your show in the West Cork Arts Centre, and you said, no, I'll move on from there. And I was like, oh, that's a great image. Tell us more.
I suppose I'm less familiar with working within a gallery. I've tended to work in public space much more, and finding alternative spaces to present. I would have done a lot of work kind of after my BA. So I lived in many years in London, and would do, I set up a collective there, different from Dig Collective, and we made installations and different interventions in public space. So and that was often participatory, socially engaged. I mean, I think there's so many different ways of doing it. I mean, with Landwalks, I wanted to bring it to Uillinn because it was an art space within the context that I've been working. But I suppose the parallel was having the website and the kind of mapped walks as a kind of another way for people to engage with the work. And there was also discussion which didn't come together during that time, partly because COVID came literally halfway through the exhibition, but to kind of look at waymarkers and different ways of people flagging up that the walks existed online for people to listen to, a bit like a kind of like a guided trail, you'd have a history trail or whatever, you could have the same for those. So I think there's different ways of activating public space, and we had an exhibition also in Skibbereen in November, which was working with the words that Muncan Magan had been collecting in his book 32 Words for Field, and we'd been responding to those words with images, and we decided, rather than have those images and words in a gallery, we turned them into fly posters. So, posters that we pasted up on walls along the town, so that everyone had access to it. So it suddenly became, these sort of empty walls became spaces to explore language and the interchange between the visual and the read, or so there's so many different ways of doing it. And I think I'm really excited by pushing the boundaries of what that is, working with the galleries, but also thinking about what could exist outside the gallery in parallel or separately from.
Thanks, William. That's that's fascinating to hear. Particularly, you kind of it sounds quite playful in a way, which is really nice.
Well, I kind of see them as provocations. It's just like particularly when it's out, not in an internal space, but when it's out on the street, it's just giving people a window into something else. I mean, a bit like advertising does, but with a more with a different ethos, I suppose. Not selling something, but it's giving you a different perspective of the everyday. A new way of seeing your environment.
Definitely. How about you, Clodagh?
I was kind of more interested in moving my work outside of the gallery. I like the idea of just happening upon something. But for the last projects, it was really important that they did take place in the gallery setting. So when I worked with Emma Lucy O'Brien, it was fantastic because we had, that opportunity to show in Visual Carlo, and, she was amazing because, she invited all of the collaborators. We were invited to the Inca Shinabor exhibition and the launch, and met him, and it was, so it was about that kind of opening up those kind of, meeting these people, but as well, the Marie Claire and Jean-Marie and Annette Sinisa worked really closely with Emma Lucy, and we decided, instead of using the big gallery space, we would also use these liminal zones to show the work, so on the kind of return of the stairs, so kind of mirroring where the audio was under bridges. It was the same kind of thing that people would happen upon them. And it's kind of interesting. I'm working on this. I'm kind of re-engaging with the plot, and it's kind of fascinating now. The plot where we were growing the Crocosmia X in 2018 that you see was just full of Crocosmia. And since then it's changed. It's kind of self-seeded, and that now there's multiple different types of wildflowers, or weeds as people would call. So I've been archiving them with the help of Sandra Murphy, who's an ecologist there at IMA, and Charlotte Salter Townsend, who works with the National Botanic Gardens. And I've been kind of archiving them using a ecological printing process. And I kind of feel for these works, they also need to be in the gallery, because weeds are often seen as irrelevant. So for me, I really like playing with the kind of gallery as this institutional space.
I suppose it's also a focus space. It's a real you can really refine what you're showing, or the way that people are viewing the work. Whereas in public space, it's a multitude. But that's what's so wonderful about working in galleries, is to have real attention to.
And there is that support around it as well. I mean, you can have a conversation, or a public talk conversation. There's all of that kind of support system, and the kind of a comfortable space to encounter the work, and
very much. Thank you both for those answers. I think they give a really interesting window into how you both approach your work, and how it develops over the course of a project. I think that's all we have time for today. So we might wrap it up there. But I'd just like to say a massive thank you to you both, to Clodagh and William, for the time you've given today. I know it's not always easy to find it, so I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'd like to thank Catherine and Lisa and the Wexford Arts Centre as well for their support in getting this event together. And yeah, to everyone who joined in to listen and watch. It's been lovely having you all here.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so much, William and Clodagh as well. Thank you for wonderful presentations and really engaging work. It's really lovely to see work like that being done. Thank you all for attending today and for logging on, and great to see so many people interested to hear more about art and how to create and what's being created and everything. So thank you so much. On behalf of the Wexford Arts Centre, thank you everyone.